I'm the scouting leader on team FRC 1261.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rohan Paladugu. I'm a member of FRC team 4112.
All right, so let's get
Ethan,
started. Oh,
Ethan, are you recording this just to make sure?
Oh, don't worry. It's been recording for a while now.
All right.
okay. All right, let's get started. Okay, so our overall structure for today's presentation is as follows. So we're going to have a short description of how a team can develop their team goals before kickoff day, and then we'll move into the biggest step, in my opinion, which is dissecting the game reveal and rules and how you should go about that. And then finally, we'll dive into developing your team's overall strategy after you have successfully analyzed the game. So team goals is something that you want to do before the season actually begins on kickoff day. And what you'll want to do is you'll want to have your team leads meet up, sit down, and look at what they would like the team to accomplish this upcoming season. And it's critical that these goals can be anything. They can be competition-based or not. So one thing to make sure when developing these goals is that they're specific and manageable. So what I mean by this is that you should say, for example, say your goal is we want to win a blue banner this year, right? You ensure that you go over what specific things you'll have to do in order to accomplish that goal. So, okay, we win a blue banner. How do we do that? We have to do well in alliance selections. We have to pick a good team. We have to strategize with them well, right? So you could say in order to reach that goal, then you would need driver practice, better automation programming, and then develop better scouting practices, right? And so the other two examples listed on the chart develop polished designs, right? This can be done through increasing your use of CAD and creating a dedicated design team and increasing the communication. And the third and final goal could also be to increase your outreach, right? So you could say, all right, we're going to try to really expand our outreach program for years to come. We're going to reach out to feeder schools and sponsors, and we're going to really try to get our name out there, right? So especially if you're a rookie team, your goal does not necessarily just have to be we're going to win a blue banner and we're going to get to Worlds every single year, right? If your team is all in agreement on the fact that you might not want to go for a blue banner, but you still might want to just instead work on upping the knowledge level, the general knowledge level of your team. That's a really good way to set you guys up for future success for years to come versus burning all your resources in one season and then not being able to achieve that blue banner and then also not having the sustainability to maybe achieve it the next year or the year after. So now that we've talked about the team goals, we'll jump right into the kickoff day task. So this is what's going to happen on January 6th. I think it's this year, January 9th, and the best practices for that specific day. So during kickoff, right off the bat, they release a game reveal video. This will tell you the very general overview and the basics of how the scoring works, how the game itself is meant to be played in the eyes of the game makers, right? So while you watch, you'll just want to make sure to keep note of all the different stages of the game. So it usually goes auto, Teleop, Endgame. And so you want to keep track of the progression of the game, how you score points, and the different areas on the field. So, for example, this last year, Infinite Recharge, it was actually really simple for understanding the progression of the game because it gave us the stages, right? You would know stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. However, that's not always clear in games such as like Power Up in 2018, for example, right? The stages aren't as clear, right? You might want to say, all right, we'll focus on the switch, then we'll move to the scale, then we'll move to the vault, right? That's a progression that a lot of the teams came up with, right? And that's the kind of stuff they want to be thinking about on a kickoff day. So another point about the game video, the video is really helpful to get a broad idea of the game, but you should never be relying on it to replace reading the rules, or you should never be relying on it to kind of tell you what the rules are for the game, right? You should always read the game manual. And so after the video, you'll be giving a code to access the manual. And the manual is going to tell you pretty much everything you need to know in depth about the game. And it's kind of like the Bible that the judges and everyone at the event will be going off of. So it's very important to read, and it will also update throughout the season. So you'll want to be sure to be checking the FRC website periodically, like every week, for those updates when they come out, because the rules, they might need to alter them throughout the weeks to make sure that the game will be fair by the time the week 1 competitions roll around. So you want to note any changes when it comes to things that don't usually change. So things like robot construction and tournament structure, those things are included in the manual, and they don't usually change from year to year. However, if there is a change, it's usually something really important, and you want to really take note of that. So make sure to reread it and then compare it with previous years to make sure you guys know what has changed and what you can just keep the same. So after reading all that, you'll want to do a rules analysis, which is basically where you determine a general sense of how the game could be played in your mind. And then after determining this, you don't want to go into design just yet. I think a lot of teams make the mistake of just rushing right into robot design or doing really nice and in-depth rules and strategy analysis. But you might want to think about how you would like your team's robot to kind of fit into the overall way that the game will be played. So here's an example of how a rules analysis could work. So the 2 images at the bottom are a great way, like I said, of understanding the progression of the game and also kind of how the game will work. So in general, you just want to think about all the different point values, all the different combinations and permutations of how you can do the game. And in general, you can start to think about what the best teams will focus on. So for example, the second that Infinite Recharge is released, it's a reasonable assumption that high-tier teams like 254, 1678, the big boys will be focusing on the higher ports and trying to sink the 3-pointer. So once you kind of figure out, all right, that's where the ceiling is, that's where the top-tier teams are doing, you can kind of place your own team on that spectrum. You could say, all right, this is what we're going to try to maybe go for, and these are priorities. Right, and we'll talk about more all the priorities and the needs, wish, wants list, stuff like that later. So now after you have like that general basis and understanding of the rules and all that, you can kind of conduct a group analysis. So this is where you'll want to come together with all your individual rules analyses and strategies and just gather a general consensus amongst your entire team on how the game could be played. So the group aspect of it all can actually bring out certain new strategies that no one else really thought of. So for example, the idea of a low bot feeding balls to a shooting bot to minimize the amount of time that a shooter bot would spend driving back and forth on the field. That was a really nice strategy that came up in 2020. And another interesting thing to look out for is something called a chokehold strategy. That's basically a certain specific way to play in elements of the game that pretty much ensures victory. Now, I believe the last time that there was like a really real way that this happened was like 2002 or something. So it's very rare. However, if you can find a way to even kind of tap into that kind of power, it'll definitely let your robot stand out during aligned selections, and it'll definitely help you throughout the entire competition. So I know an example of this was one year they had this game in 2002 where you had to push all these objectives to one side of the field, right? And so one team, what they did was they used Velcro wheels, right? And these wheels, they would just latch onto the carpet, and they would turn very slowly. And it would push all the pieces into the other side, and there's nothing that any other team could do to force it the other way because those Velcro wheels, once they're latched on, they're not going anywhere. So it's going to be really hard to find such a loophole like that, and also it's not guarantee that it won't rack up penalties as well, but it's a nice thing to take note of. So finally, to make sure that everyone's on the same page with this kind of general consensus of, what are the ways that we can play the game? What are the different strategies that could be used? Once everyone's on that kind of general consensus, it's a nice thing to develop a rules test. So a rules test will basically ensure that the entire team is knowledgeable going into competition, and usually it's just like taking random things from the handbook to ensure that the team as a whole knows what it's stacking up against. So with that, I'll hand it over to Rohan.
All right, thank you, Tejas. So now that Tejas has really gone deep into the game analysis part of our presentation, we'll move on to developing overall robot strategy. So the first real task that you should be focusing on when you're trying to decide what your main strategy will be for a match is human gameplay. So human gameplay is essentially where members of your team are sort of playing the game, but they're the ones acting as robots. So for example, in 2020, you could be, example of how to do human gameplay would be having different team members. So three team members per each side of the field, or just three, depending on how much space you might have in your build space. You can sort of run cycles of what a typical robot might do during the game. So for example, in 2020, a lot of robots did trench runs where they would move from the human player loading station for their alliance through the trench underneath the control panel and to the initiation line, or just in front of the trench to shoot power cells into the high goal. So it might seem a bit silly to, perform this task, and a lot of teams don't end up doing this just because, it comes off as silly, comes off as not really worth it, but it allows your team to gauge potential cycle times, gauge potential overall cycles that robots might perform during a match. And in my opinion, it's one of the most heavily slept on tasks that teams don't really do on kickoff day. So with that, let's move on to the need, want, wish list. So the first thing, this is the second thing that you would do after, you finished human gameplay. So what you should be doing now is you've gotten an idea of what gameplay might look like for a match. So you're like, all right, most teams will probably be collecting power cells, scoring them either the low goal or the high goal, and at the end of the match, they'll probably get to the generator switch and climb, because in 2020, that was the single highest, most point awarding task that you could do. So with that in mind, what your team should focus on doing now is creating a need, want, wish list. So what does this mean? So a need, want, wish list is essentially taking up different tasks that your robot might accomplish and breaking them up into the needs category, which is something the robot must absolutely 100% do every match. The wants list, which are tasks that your robot can reasonably do depending on how well you design it and practice and perform in matches. So those are things that you would want to do, but it's not a requirement to have them to be somewhat successful in matches. And then the wishes list are tasks that are pretty hard to implement, but they don't really have too much of a bearing on success compared to tasks in the wants and the needs part of the list. But if you do implement them, they will benefit your team in some manner. So for an example of this, going back to 2020, would be that most teams, after reading the rules, categorize climbing the generator switch at the end of the match as being an absolute need. So that's an example for a need. So, and then some teams, they categorize shooting in the high goal as a want, while other teams said scoring power cells in the low goal as a want. So it just depends on those team goals that you sort of developed before the season, and you're basically taking those expectations and saying, all right, based on those expectations of what we want to accomplish, what tasks do we need to accomplish here? So let's move into an example. So this right here is a example 2020 needs, wants, wish list. So what's one thing that some of you attend that the audience members see that is something that is does not really score a lot of points necessarily, but is an important aspect that your robot should be focusing on. So I'll give you guys a minute to, read through this list, figure out what that task is, and, type your answer in the Q&A box. Let's see. All right, so we got one answer already. We'll give another minute or two for others to put their guesses into the Q&A box. All right, so the one response that we got was drive, and that is correct. The most important task that not necessarily gives your robot a sort of immediate points is driving. And a lot of teams tend to leave this off of their needs, wants, wishes list because they're like, oh yeah, obviously our robot's going to be able to drive. But you don't know that. You don't know what's going to happen this season. You can't just make those assumptions. So it's better to have it on paper there so everyone knows, all right, we need to be able to drive, even though it seems like, yeah, you should be able to drive. So some few points to note about this needs, wants, wish list is that there are no specific robot mechanisms mentioned. If you look at the list, you can see that all of the objectives here are tasks. They're not any potential designs. They're not any potential mechanisms that would be used to accomplish this task. And that's something that you really need to focus on during kickoff weekend is to stay away from robot design as much as you can until you finish these very important strategy tasks that you need to accomplish in order to make sure that, all right, we have our strategy nailed and now we can, rather than focusing on a strategy, week 2, week 3, we can focus on robot design and iteration, stuff like that. Another thing to note is that these are specific goals for the robot to accomplish. So if you look at the wants list, we say drive at 14 to 15 feet per second. So, in the needs list, we said drive around the field. And so that was a bit broad. So in the wants list, we went specific. We said, all right, we want to drive between 14 feet per second and 15 feet per second throughout the match. So that's the speed we should be targeting. And again, that's not mentioning any specific mechanisms. It's just saying, all right, here's a task that we want to be able to accomplish. We're specifying that task, and when the time comes, we'll be able to, develop the designs that we need to get our robot to be able to accomplish those tasks. And so what this allows your team to do is it allows you to build mechanisms based on the values expressed in this list, right? So you've gone through and you've finished this list. So what does that mean now? It means that it's time to move on to developing your overall match strategy. So like Kay just said earlier, there are 3 levels pretty much to every game in FRC. And, there's some variation, but for the most part, they follow this straightforward pattern of auto, Teleop, and Endgame. So for each level of the match, you want to be focusing on getting specific tasks accomplished at each level. So if we take the 2020 game, for FRC Infinite Recharge, we know that in auto, a lot of teams moved off the initiation line to get those initial points, and then some teams scored in the low goal, or other teams scored in the high goal. So those are some tasks that teams look to accomplish in their match strategies then. If we moved on to Teleop, a lot of teams were intaking balls and scoring them either in the low goal or the high goal, or some teams were playing defense on the opposing alliance. So those are some tasks that those teams might have thought to incorporate in their match strategy then. And then for endgame, a lot of teams move to the generator switch to either park or to climb the generator switch. So, keeping in mind those specific tasks that you accomplish during the match is really key here. And it allows you to be laser focused and know exactly when you're going to be accomplishing each one of these tasks. And with that, let's move to a more detailed example of match strategy. So here we have an example match strategy, and I'll give you guys a minute or two just to, look at it, soak it in, understand what it's saying here, and then I'll point out some key aspects. So I'll give you guys a minute just to read that. All right. So one thing that I want to point out immediately is that a lot of that your match strategy really depends on your needs, wants, wish list. They're related in the sense that if it's not on your needs, thoughts, wants, wish list, it shouldn't be on your match strategy and vice versa, right? So we can see that here with our example needs, wants, wish list. We said that we want to be able to drive, right, as a need. So we can see that right away in autonomous to drive off the initiation line to get those points. And then, some of the tasks were to shoot balls in the high goal for that needs, wants, wish list. So we can see that in the autonomous period where it says that this team wants to shoot the 3 power cells that are preloaded into the robot into the inner port on the high goal. And so we can also see them wanting to shoot power cells into the high goal in Teleop period, where they said, all right, we're going to be moving to the human player station to intake balls, performing a trench run, and then shooting power cells into the high goal. And then we're just going to cycle that specific motion throughout the rest of the match. And then we can even see in Endgame that, they said they wanted to climb in their needs, wants, wish list, and that was a need for them because it was such an important aspect of this year's game. So they said, all right, we're going to move up to the generator switch, and we're going to line up and climb onto it. So that's just an example match strategy. So what this allows you to do, as I said earlier, is it allows your team to stay laser focused and focusing on the different tasks that they should be accomplishing in a match and, keeping this cognizant as they move into robot design and, drive team practice later on in the field season. So with that, we finished talking about how to develop your overall strategy. Now let's get into talking about how you guys can measure robot performance with the information that you've collected on kickoff day. So with that, let's move into scouting. So why scouting? This is a question that a lot of people have, and it's something that a lot of rookies tend to have because it doesn't seem to be a task that is necessary, but in reality, it really is. So there's 3 main objectives with scouting. It allows you to help examine the competition. So it allows you to understand in a more nuanced way what the different robots in your district event or regional or even world's division are capable of doing. So you can be able to analyze those robots. And this helps with alliance selection. So let's say you're in the position of getting picked by an alliance captain or are an alliance captain. Being able to know what the different robots in the competition are and what they're capable of, and being able to use that data that you've collected from scouting to, help aid in those decisions can really be advantageous because it allows you to get the best fit for your team as the best fit for your team that you can. And so what all of this does, it allows you to gain that competitive edge that some teams might not have in matches. So this can allow you to, go into limbs. It can get you into the semifinals and the finals, and you might even win the whole event. Who knows? Scouting is that really, really important factor in, helping guarantee teams, not guarantee, but helping, improve team success just because you're able to get all of these benefits that you normally wouldn't have without it. So that's just a brief overview of why, scouting is important. And now let's move into scouting objectives. So there's 3 main points here. The first being to find important scoring metrics from the rules. And this goes back to what Tejas said earlier about how you guys should be focusing on, you guys should be doing a really deep rules analysis. And what that allows you to do among developing your match strategy is finding important scoring metrics to scout for. So in 2020, for example, a lot of teams, climbed the generator switch. So a lot of alliances at, district events and regionals in weeks 1 and 2 were primarily composed of robots that could at least climb the generator switch at the end because it was the one task that was able to help guarantee you that win. So that's just, the first objective that you should be really focusing on when, developing tasks to scout for and stuff like that. So you also want to make sure that the data that you're collecting is easy to get. So what do I mean by this? So, it's best to explain this with an example. Because scouts are human. They do make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. We're human. That's just, an attribute of ours. Do we want to make it as hard as possible? Do we want to make it so that scouts are there trying to calculate the average number of balls going into the inner goal compared to the outer goal in the high goal. No, we don't want them to do that. That's going to take more effort than just saying, all right, how many goals went into the inner goal compared and how many goals went into the outer goal, rather than like having them do all this complicated data collection and data analysis on their own. We can use different tools such as Microsoft Excel, Google Sheets. Some teams have their own calculations to get all these numbers. So you want to make sure that your scouts are, you want to make sure that the job that you're giving to your scouts is as easy as you can, while not sacrificing data quality. And so another objective that you want to sort of focus on when looking at scouting is establishing attributes that are not valuable to your team. So this is where stuff like do not pick lists and stuff like that come into play. So there might be some robot designs that your team deems is not the best fit for you guys. So if you guys already are a defense bot, you probably don't want to be paired up with another defense bot. You want to probably be paired up with two high-scoring robots so that they can focus on actually getting the points you need to win the match while you go and play defense. So stuff like that are attributes that you need to be cognizant of, and so sort of informed about in order to make the best decisions when it comes to align selection and match strategy for align selection. With that, let's move to an example scouting objective. So here you can see that it's broken down into two categories: pit scouting and match scouting. So what does that mean? Let's pause here and explain that. Pit scouting is essentially where you go into the pits where all the teams are located with their robots before matches start, and essentially sort of interview all of them. Figure out what their general robot mechanisms are, what their drivetrain is, what they say their capabilities are for that competition, and collecting all that initial data so that your team can be like, all right, so here's just a really broad preview of what the competition looks like. Make sure to note that these are the teams that are short bots and can do trench runs, while these are the teams that are tall bots but can have a higher accuracy at hitting those inner 3-point shots. So that's what pit scouting is. It's more qualitative data. It's not as quantitative as what match scouting is. And speaking of match scouting, let's get into that. So match scouting is the quantitative data that you're collecting during matches. So as qualifiers are going on, your scouts are sitting there and they're getting all these numbers for how many power cells were scored, did the robot move off the initiation line in auto, did they climb or did they park during endgame, did their lines balance, was any defense played, and the last one is one thing that I think is one of the more important aspects that your scout should be focusing on, and that's if there are any robot functions. Now, what does this tell you? It tells you that, hey, even though this robot might have had a really good first and third match, their second match was not that great because they had some issues. So it might tell you that this robot is not as consistent as they may have seen in those first and third matches because they had issues in their second match. So keeping in mind all of these different objectives, and where you get them from is pretty much from your rules analysis, your needs, wants, wish list, and your match strategy. Remember, scouting allows you to get the best aligns that you can to complement each other's strengths while minimizing all of your weaknesses. So that's what you guys should be focusing on when it comes to developing your scouting objectives and what specific data values you're trying to look for. And with that, let's move into what to do now. So you finished all this introductory, you finished all your strategy analysis, you got your match strategy, your needs, wants, wish list, and it's the end of kickoff week, and your team's like, all right, what's the next steps? Well, there's two main things that you could be doing here. And so your scouting team and strategy team could be focusing on developing the scouting systems to collect the data that you guys analyzed, that you guys determined to be of importance to you. And then you could also be moving into robot design. So this is where you take those items on the needs, wants, wish list and sort of develop prototypes and move forward with actually building your robot. So those are some things that you guys will be more prepared to do now that you've gone ahead and done this initial strategy. And so that's where all this all this rules analysis, this needs, wants, wish list, the match strategy development, all of that comes into play is with these two main objectives that you're going to be focusing on the rest of build season. And it allows you to get that leg up and be more focused and prepared for competition. With that, let's move on to some resources for you guys. So these are a few resources that you guys can look to for strategy and scouting development. There's Chief Delphi, which is an unofficial FRC forum where, various teams can converse about, topics like robot design, scouting, strategy, programming, all of that stuff. And then there are robot and 3D teams, or RA3D teams. So these are teams like Snow Problem at the University of Minnesota, Capital City RA3D, Greenhorns, and all of that. And their main task is to essentially give teams all this, prototyping information that they've spent during the first 3 days of the season. So that kickoff weekend and probably that Monday, they're spending time to, give teams all this like wealth of knowledge. And so both of these resources are probably posting stuff all throughout that weekend. Chief Delphi is active pretty much the entire competition season. So you want to be making sure that you're checking these resources relatively frequently. RA3D teams usually get their robots done like the third or fourth day of build day, and their strategy stuff is for the most part up within a few hours after kickoff, so you guys can reference that for your own strategy. And with that, are there any questions? So that's it for our presentation. Now we're opening up for you guys to ask us any questions based on strategy or scouting analysis, stuff like that. So any questions?
If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the Q&A section.
Any questions at all? Remember, there are no dumb questions.
Yeah.
Any questions? Any at all?
Well, by schedule, we are here till 12:15, so if you have any questions by then, please feel free to ask them.
You're welcome to the person who said thank you. Thank you. So any specific questions? We don't want to waste your guys' time if there are no questions. So if there are no questions, do you guys want to end the session early and Tejas?
Sure, yeah.
All right, so I guess that's it for us, guys. Thank you very much for attending our session, and please note that the video and our presentation will be posted to the Georgia First website. And so if you guys want to reference all of that, you guys can go back and look there for if you guys wanted to have, if you had any questions later on, you could look to that presentation. So with that, I think we are done.
All right. Thank you guys for dropping by.